Remington is filling in for Pat today, but we have a very special guest in studio today. We have the owner of Coffee Culture, Robert Riley. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, we really appreciate you coming on. You know, I'm a huge fan of your shop, man. It's some of the best coffee in town. The cookies that you have, all the little pastries, everything is in. One of my favorite parts about it is just like the vibe in the shop. It's just so cool. The floor that you guys is that an epoxy?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
I love it. It looks so cool. It's like this cool like blue and like black, blue, silver, like swirl. Like it's really cool. And just the vibe in there is really cool. And then all of your employees and baristas and everybody in there is just so friendly, and I've never had a bad experience. So I just huge fan of what you guys do there.
I appreciate that.
Yeah,
It's bound to happen, but just keep coming back.
Yeah,
we'll make it right.
100%.
We'll make it right.
No, it's great, man. Anytime I'm in South County, which I am in frequently. I live in South County. It's one of the closest coffee shops to my house. And so if I've ever got, time to kill, I always go in there, get a coffee, and steal your Wi-Fi for an hour. It's great.
I love people to drop in. It's one of my favorite things is to have people. And, the shop, I'm from California.
Okay.
And so when we designed out the shop, I just kind of went with my vibe, and I really wanted to have a cool spot. I always said I wanted half of it to be the cookies and coffee and pastries, and the other half to be the experience when you're there.
Sure.
And just have kind of a chill vibe where everybody's welcome. And, the playlist, it's everything from Frank Sinatra to, the Gaslight Anthem, everything in between. So that's really what we go for there.
Yeah, it's definitely got like that like surfer skate kind of vibe to it, which is like totally.
I'm from Orange County, California, born and raised.
I was going to ask, so where specifically in California?
In Garden Grove is where I primarily, kind of all over Orange County, but primarily my formative years were in Garden Grove. Really.
Yeah, I was born in Laguna Niguel.
Oh, were you?
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
so you're...
Yeah, and lived only until I was 2. My dad was stationed out there when he was a Marine. So
okay,
and then mom and family and all's in Midwest, so we moved back.
Yeah. Now was he at El Toro?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's where the scenes were filmed for the original Top Gun.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good to know.
Yeah, the base isn't there anymore. It's a parking lot, but
right.
Well, so now what brought you to St. Louis?
Well, that's a great part of the story. May 14th, 2008, I was released from federal prison. So I came to St. Louis. My mom married a guy up here 30 years ago approximately, and so she had been here for a while. And when I was getting out of prison, this was my kind of restart spot,
You said 2014?
In 2008, May 14th.
Okay.
Yeah, May 14th, 2008. Yeah. You never forget the date. So
yeah, for sure.
I would imagine.
For sure.
Yeah. So I came here with about 20 months of sobriety when I got out. And I did 6 months in the federal halfway house here in the city, the Dismas House. And during that time, I went through a program, and they help you find a job. And I actually got a job out here in Fenton, over there by the Bluffs. At a printing company, kind of the ground level guy.
Sure.
When it snowed, guess who they handed the shovel to? Yeah. And listen, that job was really a pillar of my success. It really was. And so throughout my journey, I've always kind of stressed for the recovery people that I work with, got to have a job. Got to have some sort of recovery program. It doesn't have to be 12-step necessarily. It could be the gym. It could be, church. It could be whatever. But you have to have something that you're connected to, and a job, that, and a home. And those are really the 3 foundations that I needed. So that's kind of where I started at. I worked through that job. I guess I'm going to jump into my story.
Yeah, please do. Yeah, jump into it.
So I got that job, and I was going to a lot of. I jumped into the recovery community, 12-step. That's what I do, and was going to a lot of meetings. And this is now we're in about 2009, 10ish, about more 10ish than anything. And that's really when you started hearing about a lot of the heroin overdose deaths. And so I had made a friend here, Chad. And he and I were going to meetings, and he's from Chicago, I'm from Orange County, and a little bit more progressive or a little more advanced than St. Louis in some areas, you know. And we both looked at each other. We're like, well, why doesn't anybody have Narcan? You know, naloxone, which is the opioid reversal drug. And so we made a trip up to Chicago to an organization up there and got like a truckload of this naloxone that was really illegal for us to have.
Really?
Brought it back down, well, in Missouri at that time, brought it back down to St. Louis. We started handing it out outside these meetings because we were literally, our friends were just dropping left and right. And so
this was before kind of the fentanyl.
Yeah, this is before the fentanyl. This is when you still had heroin around. And so, you know, we were doing that, and I'll tell you, Channel 5, KSDK, picked up on it, heard about these two guys, you know, these two rebels running around handing out Narcan, and they came and did a story on us, and, you know, half the city lost its mind saying we're enabling and all this other crazy stuff. And we told them, yeah, we're enabling them to breathe. You know, that's the only thing we're enabling. And the other half was parents, brothers, sisters, wives, husbands that were dealing with addiction at that time and dealing with the overdoses. And they're like, thank God you guys are doing this. And so we, being kind of naive, well, Chad was a former prosecuting attorney from Chicago who had gotten busted, and it was very much in the news and everything up there because he had become an opioid user. And so he got busted with heroin up there, and he was down here trying to find his own recovery and such. Anyway, so Chad's like, we can't hand this out legally. You had to have a prescription for it. So let's see if we can make it legal. And I can remember back behind the bluffs in my little one-bedroom apartment, you know, me tattooed from the neck to my ankles, sitting there in some shorts, you know, and I'm emailing all these state legislators, and one of them hit us back up, and that's who sponsored our bill, a guy by the name of Brian Spencer. And so Chad and I started making these drives up to Jefferson City, and long story short is we got the first naloxone laws passed that made it. Well, the first one we passed removed all the red tape for more ambulances, more first responders to carry it, because they were like, oh, we're not going to do that. We don't want to put. And so we passed that one. Then the second one made it possible so that you can go to the pharmacy without a prescription and just buy it from the pharmacist.
Interesting.
And so we removed the red tape, the barriers. We were removing barriers. And
I know my wife. My wife's a nurse, and she worked in the ER. Both at Mercy and in Children's downtown, and she's had to administer it like in the hospital. So that's testament to all your work. You've seen it. I've seen it in real life.
Yeah, it's you know, it was just it's still a mess. Not quite like it was. It's so much more readily available now. It's just that you mentioned fentanyl. The substances have become a lot more dangerous.
Yeah.
With the fentanyl. So we wrote those laws, got them passed. You know, we had all those moms.
Now, what goes into writing a bill?
What we honestly did was we reached out to other harm reduction agencies around the country, and we let them mentor us, and we took the language from all the different ones, and we put it all together and got the best one. You know, like we also co-authored the 9/11 Good Samaritan Law, which so they, you know, at that time they were doing a lot of, you know, you and I are getting high in the hotel and you fall out. I'm a drug user and I don't want to be sick. So I'd grab the dope and I'd run off scared. Well, nobody was saving that life.
Right, because, you know, if they call the cops, then they're in trouble.
Exactly. So we wanted to remove that barrier. You know, I can remember sitting in the old St. Louis County Prosecuting Attorney McCullough's office, you know, and I was talking to him. I was advocating for him to kind of support us, this law that we were trying to get passed. And he's like, Robert, we don't really prosecute those anyways. And first of all, I was like, yeah, that's Yes. You know, like, yeah, you do.
Yeah.
I didn't say that to his face, but I was thinking it the whole time. And I said, with all due respect, Mr. McCullough, it's not if you are going to prosecute, if the user feels like they could get prosecuted. So the work is not just passing the law. The work is getting the word out there so that they stop and call, you know. And so that, you know, those moms that had kind of rallied around us at the beginning, supporting us, you know, they wanted us to start a nonprofit. So they actually helped us start the nonprofit so that we could they could help support us going. You know, I was working at a printing company. I was in college at the time. Chad was waiting tables down on Damon, you know, like we weren't, but we were spending that's what we spent our money on, you know, and that's what we were doing. And so they started, you know, they helped us put together this nonprofit. We started getting some donations. I started going around town. Different companies would have me come in and tell my story, and they would make a large donation. You know, I remember Centene one time did like a $10,000 donation for me telling a 30-minute story about my life. Awesome. I was like, wow, you know, but, and so that's what we started doing. That kind of got the ball rolling, you know, and that nonprofit is still around, Mo Network. In fact, they're having their 10-year gala next month in March. And so they do great work in the city. I am not on the board. Chad's not on the board any longer. We're not involved in day-to-day operations. I can get into that in a second. You know, I've taken a break from addiction treatment. From there, we went on to form, you know, we started a sober living company. And all these things we didn't do, guys. We didn't do this to like go start companies you know, it wasn't even to change the world per se. It was because there was a need there.
Yeah.
And we were just trying to fill those gaps where other agencies weren't doing it. And, you know, there's an agency, a big agency here, that at the time when we were advocating for Narcan, you know, they like lost their minds. And they're the ones that coined we were rebels. And so we ended up starting a nonprofit in Florida called Rebel Recovery, by the way.
I was going to say, I think the country's kind of founded on rebels. It's not really the word that you see. You don't see it as a negative in any way.
So, you know, we always embraced the criticism as part of it.
Sure.
You know, I had death threats when we were on the front page of the RFT about the work that we do. You know, I had death threats, you know.
For people, for trying to get Narcan?
For helping people.
What?
Yeah, just the stigma. It's the stigma. And that's the biggest thing to this day that we fight is the stigma associated with it. Because it keeps people sick.
Well, what is the negatives? I guess they think you're enabling people by having the Narcan.
We're enabling, you know, there's that whole NIMBY, not in my backyard. There's the whole, you know, there's a school district out here that at one point I was speaking in like 17 area high schools, and I wasn't going in and doing a DARE program.
Right,
I was actually bringing people in that were early in recovery. I was bringing moms in that had lost kids, actually found them deceased. And we were just like we're doing right here. Yeah. We were telling our real honest story, trying to make those connections, not trying to blow smoke or scare them, or we're trying to educate them so that they can make better decisions, you know. Yeah. Better choices, or at least have the information. I mean, I could pull up my phone right now because I would always give my phone number out at the schools. I've given my phone to probably 50,000 students in St. Louis, my personal cell phone.
Sure.
And I'd always tell them two things. One, don't put me in your phone as a heroin guy. I don't want your parents calling the cops on me. Two, don't add me on Snapchat. Those are the two things. But like 3, 4, 5 years later, these kids would text me and say, my dad, my brother, my boyfriend. And I would always tell them, just keep my phone number in there. That way you always have something. Even if you just want to anonymously text me and say, hey, what do you know about smoking crack? Let me give you the real information so you can make a better choice.
Sure.
You know, I'm not here to stop you. Obviously, I don't want you doing that. But let me at least educate you. So we kind of took that road, but everything was born out of need. We started a sober living company because there wasn't that many for women at the time. In the apartment above our little South City, we were down at South Broadway and Gasconade at that time. We had this little hole in the wall right in the middle of the dope set.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you're in the thick
but
of
that's
it
where that's where the people we were trying to serve.
Sure. Yeah.
That's where we were handing out the Narcan. That's where we were doing the clean needle exchange, even though it was illegal. But we had the support of the Mayor Slay at that time. Okay. Jennifer Joyce was the circuit attorney for City of St. Louis. She called us to her office. And literally, this is what I'm still friends with her to this day. She's been in my coffee shop. She's retired now. But she's like, come in here and educate me on heroin. I was like, what is going on? This guy come out of federal prison going in the prosecutor's office. But it was cool. So there was some really valuable people. I'm dropping names because those people helped. Steve Stinger, who ended up getting in his own trouble later on, he was a huge help with us. My buddy Pat Dolan got us into those doors, and it was just people trying to make a difference. Sure. So as much as the stigma was out there, people throwing flyers back at us, telling us, get out of here, there was also a lot of people that helped along the way, But I'll say this, that the Mo Network moms, the ones that lost their kids, the ones that went down to the basement and found their only child, the ones that that lost their husbands, in the subway bathroom, those are the ones that really, they're the ones that we took to Jefferson City, and Chad and I would get up there and we would spit all the facts out, but it was their stories that made the connection with the legislators, with the Republicans, the conservatives, that made the connections that got them to okay this stuff, and ultimately. It's saved lives. It's helped get it in the hands of people that needed it.
Yeah, and what year did it ultimately get passed? Like from the beginning when you started this, like how long did it take?
2015, we stood behind. Forgetting his name, or whoever the governor was at that time, but we did it out here actually in High Ridge. He signed the law out there, 2015 and 16. And then I think we got Good Samaritan done in 17 or 18.
Now, what's Good Samaritan?
So that's the one where if he and I are getting high, they can call even if they show up and there's drugs there.
That's the Good Samaritan rule. Okay.
Nobody will be arrested. Well, let me say this. The person calling and the person experiencing the accidental overdose will not be arrested.
Everybody else get the hell out of there.
Everybody else get the hell out of there. Yeah, you're going to jail. So... But that was kind of the beginning. And, then we just started. So we started the sober living because there was a need for women's. When I was by then I'd already got out of college and I was already working as a counselor over at Clayton Behavioral and over in Ladue. And when I was writing the policies and procedures for the organization, I thought it was ludicrous that somebody would go live in a sober living. And if they took a hit off of a joint or they downed a beer on the way home because their wife told them they were getting divorced or, like any type of use, they would tell you, all right, grab your stuff, you're out of here, and kick you out on the street. And I thought it was ludicrous that when they need you the most, you give them 30 minutes to pack their stuff and get out. And so I was like, we're not going to do that. I'm not saying they get to stay there, but we're going to do an assessment on them. And we're going to see what they actually need. Do they need to go to a higher level of care? Do they need to go to detox? Do they need to go back to treatment, back to outpatient? What do we need to, let's do something rather than just do what we've always done, which is throw them out. Yeah. And so we started that, and the state eventually mandated all the other organizations follow those policies and procedures. Okay. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Because they saw the value in it, and they saw that we made it work too. So we just, and I'm not trying to shoot any sunshine up we were doing practical application stuff. We found a need, and we were just trying to fill that gap where other organizations were tied up in red tape and we got to take it to the board. We don't know about this. It's too controversial. Chad and I are like, we're just doing this, and we'll see if it works or not. And so that's kind of how that came about. Wow. So we did Mo Network. We did the sober living. And then a friend of mine at the time approached me and said, very wealthy guy, said, do you want to start a treatment center with me? And so I went and took a look at it out in Dittmer, Missouri. And I ended up starting Sauna Lake Recovery Center with him. And so I'm the co-founder of that. I ran it as the COO for the first 2 years. And those were the organizations here. And then, like I mentioned, Rebel Recovery down in Florida, a friend of ours actually headed all that up, but we were the co-founders of it with them. And that was, they basically doing the same thing as Mo Network here, doing harm reduction services, peer support services, kind of hooking people up in need with services that they needed and filling those gaps, you know.
Can you kind of like outline what, you know, I guess what's the initial approach and like what are these levels of care and how you go through that process? Because like I'm naive to all of this.
Yeah.
And from my understanding, like I wouldn't know where to start in terms of, you know, to one, assess somebody who is dealing with these issues, and two, you know, what is the appropriate amount of care? What's the, because everything that you've talked about so far has been like truly coming from the giving the person that's dealing with these issues grace in their ability to, you know, there's hope that there's obviously something that you can do to help them through all of this process.
Yeah, you know, we at Mo Network, our approach was always, let's not do any more harm than what's already been done to them. Okay. Right? Like, you need to come in and use our restroom for a few minutes? Sure. Yeah. You know, let me get you a cup of coffee. We set up computers over there. Here, check your Facebook, check your email, whatever it is. We just try to treat them like humans.
Sure.
And not judging them based upon their substance use. And I don't know if it's a disorder without doing an actual clinical assessment on them.
Sure.
So that's where we always started, was just meeting people where they're at. Mm-hmm. You don't want to go to treatment. You don't want any help. You just want to get some Narcan to be safe. That's freaking amazing. Here, let me give you 2 of them. Mm-hmm. Here's a bottle of water. You know, I bought a hot dog machine, and I would on Monday nights I would make hot dogs, you know, and give them out because they're hungry. You know, they're living in VACO buildings, you know, using dirty water out of the back of old toilets
for their needles.
Yeah, to bang dope, you know, and so giving them a little bit of grace. Not beating them up over the head over it, you know, and that was always our approach. And, you know, I have tons of names and memories of people that would just come there just for those things, you know, a bottle of water, some Narcan, some clean needles, whatever, a hot dog, just a warm place to get out of the weather, you know, that 6 months down the road said, hey, I'm ready to go to treatment. And it was only because of our approach with them. You know, and we didn't invent this. Again, I'm not trying to take any credit here. We did what other organizations around the country, what they had found that worked. You know, our thing was, let's just treat them like regular people, you know, because that's what they are.
Yeah.
They're just struggling with an issue right now that's gripped America, you know. They're trying to escape the world that we all live in. You know, and unfortunately, they do it with a high-risk substance.
Sure.
You know, other people do it with a couple of beers, you know, but that's not what addiction is. So that was always our approach, just meet them right where they're at. If they asked for help, then we would get them into a state-funded facility, get them to do an assessment. Do they need detox? Do they need residential? Do they need outpatient? Do they need sober living? Do they need to get an ID? Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? What is it that they need to kind of move forward from where they're at now that they're ready? Yeah. You know, because that window of opportunity is really small. Mm-hmm. You know, it's usually in between. It's between having dope and not having dope and not having money for any more dope. And so you get this little window of opportunity to engage them where they can hear you, you know. I tell parents, you can believe 2 things from somebody that's in active addiction. One is that they love you. When they call you and tell you they love you, they mean that. And 2 is that they really don't want to live like that, you know, but there's not a lot of help out there, especially at that time. I mean, we have so many more services nowadays, but at that time, there just wasn't a lot of services. You know, we would have to take people, like people would call us, Chad and I, this is before Mo Network, the nonprofit. People would call us and be like, I'm ready. And we would literally have to take them over to St. Mary's Hospital or one of the hospitals and sign an affidavit saying they told us they were going to hurt themselves if we didn't try to get them help. We would have to lie and sign these affidavits, and to get them into the psych hold, to hold them there for 3 to 5 days, just to kind of detox them. And then when they got out, I've driven people to the country where somebody would say, yeah, I'll keep them out here to help them sober up for a month. You know, I'll feed them. I'll let them, you know, stay in the spare room. I mean, people really came out to help. You know, that's the story. Yeah. As many naysayers as there was a lot of people that were there to help too.
That's awesome.
Wow.
Because it touched them.
That's amazing. Yeah. Well, in your experience, how much of addiction is like physical dependence, and how much of it is more of like identity and psychology?
Well, they're two different things. So, you know, we don't have a test.
Right.
It says, okay, you're going to be a drug user. You're going to be an alcoholic. You're going to be, you know, we don't have that test. We're getting better about identifying markers, but there's just too many things. There's, you know, childhood trauma. There's genetics involved. There's, you know, the environment that you're in. You know, I grew up around, I was talking to you, my uncles all from Texas. You know, I'll qualify my family in Texas. I have a cousin whose first name is Budweiser.
No way.
Wow. Okay.
And if you like that, you're going to love this. His sister's name really is Brandy.
No.
So that qualifies, you know, my family, right? Like they drank and so growing up for myself, my father went to prison when I was 2.5. He got out when I was 38.
Wow.
And he was a heroin user right after Vietnam War and all that stuff. But my whole family, that, you know, drinking, drugs, some hard drugs, but, you know, a lot of like weed and things like that. But it was just, that was the culture.
Sure.
That was what it was. You know, even me thinking about finding my own sobriety and recovery, you know, what do you mean I can't drink on a Friday? You know, I can see Monday through, you know what I mean? But what do you mean Friday after work, a couple, you know? And, but that's not the way I ever drank anyways, you know? And I was a polysubstance user. So I would drink until everybody's like, you're an alcoholic. You got to stop drinking. I'd be like, all right, I get it. Stop yelling at me. I'm just going to smoke some weed, you know? And then I would smoke weed until they're like, look, dude, you got to get off our couch and stop eating off our groceries. You know, all right, I will. I'll just bang a little dope on the weekends, you know? So I was always, I couldn't picture a life without having something in it to kind of change the way I felt.
Interesting.
You know, and recovery, you know, for me, 12-step has given me a way to get out of the obsession. That's what you're talking about, the mental part of it. Obviously, you break the physical dependence on it, and that depends on the substance, to answer your question, you know. But it helps me deal with the mental obsession too. And for me, it was finding a more spiritual life, you know, and that spirituality means something different to me every week, you know. Sometimes it's just, I'm a grandpa now,
Nice.
you know, I get to be a dad to my boys, you know, and these are, you know, when I tell my story, you know, my son, Aaron Riley, had written me a letter when he was about 9 years old, and it started out, "Dear Robert."
Oof.
You know, while I'm locked up, and, you know, stop writing us, stop calling us, stop saying you're our dad. You've never been around for anything, you know, and we don't want to hear from you anymore, you know. And I come to St. Louis. You know, I've reached out to him. He was the first one to write me back.
That's awesome.
You know, and then when he was 15 and going skateboarding down every street I ever skateboarded down in Orange County where he was being raised at, doing a lot of the same things his father had done as a teenager. And his mom said, you got to take him, you know, and he was surfing couches at his friends. He was I wouldn't say kicked out of his mom's, but he wasn't staying at his mom's. He was kicked out of high school at the time, suspended. And he would call me up to try to hustle me for $40 for a bus pass, or, I don't know how many bikes he told me he had stolen. He never had a bike in the first place, but he was trying to get money out of me. And I just kept telling him, Aaron, when you're ready to do something different, kiddo, Dad's got you. I got you 100%, and it took about 9 months of me working a 12-step program, just praying and turning it over to the universe before he called me one night and I had him a plane ticket, and he lived with me in that apartment over there behind the bluffs, that 1-bedroom apartment. He graduated from Northwest High School.
Oh, cool. Wow.
And because of where we
right
lived, because of where we lived on that side, even though the other one's closer, but
yeah.
And that's part of my story too, getting to be a dad. And now both of my, my oldest son ended up moving out here.
Cool.
He went to Texas first, and then he came up here, and he's married here. He just bought a house out in out past Warrenton.
Okay.
Aaron lives out here, and he's got a little girl, my granddaughter, and I got a grandson from Tyler, and so both of my boys are out here.
That's amazing.
That's amazing.
That's the part of the story that matters.
Yeah.
The writing laws and doing the show intervention and going to the White House a couple of times. Like, those are cool stories to tell, but my kids and my grandkids loving me, that's why I stay sober today.
That's amazing.
Wow. That's beautiful, man. So what ultimately led you to wanting to get sober?
Well, when I was sitting in the feds, going to prison, getting locked up didn't stop me from using either.
Yeah, I have heard that. It can be.
I wouldn't say that I had ever really tried to be sober before. I had brief periods. So like I said, when the heat would come down, or I'd go to jail for 6 months or whatever. But here's the story. I was walking the track with this guy, and I'd just gotten the letter from Aaron Riley. My little cousin down in Texas he was 21. He had just got murdered. He robbed a drug dealer, basically. And I was walking the track with this guy, and I was telling him about this letter from my kid and my cousin and my dad going to prison when I was really young. And here I am, like, all I heard growing up was, your dad was such a smart guy. Drugs got him. Don't be like your dad. Guess where I was at?
Yeah.
You can literally go to the Federal Bureau of Prisons and look up my name, and my dad's name will be right above mine because he went to federal prison at one time. And I'm not proud of that by any means, but I was following in those steps. And there was some violence that happened on the unit that same day that we had been walking the track, and I got locked down for 30 days. And we all got locked down for 30 days. And I was thinking about what this guy was telling me, Well, let me back up. He called me after I showed him those. He said, come out the next day. That's the day that all this happened. The next day I come out, and he hands me a piece of paper, and it's his time computation sheet. And it had, next to his release date, it said deceased. In the feds, it's called truth in sentencing. So if they give you 30 years in the feds, you're about to go do 30 years. They give you 40 days a year, good time. There's no parole in the federal system. You get a life sentence in the federal system, you don't get out, ever. It's not like you go do 25 or 30 and then make parole when you're an old man. You do not come out, except for in a body bag.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And it's called truth in sentencing. It was passed in like 90, 91, somewhere.
Okay.
So his said deceased. And he'd handed me that paper, and he looked right at me, man, just like I'm looking at you. And he said, if you don't change something, this is what you're going to end up with. And so that night is when the violence happened. We got locked down. All this is rattling around in my head. I come out 29 days later, and we all get out. And I went and talked to this guy on the unit about going to some meetings, and I started going to meetings with them, and that kind of got the ball rolling.
Wow, that's crazy. Ultimately, how long were you in, I guess, not necessarily federal prison, but I guess in totality?
I mean, if you take jail and everything,
Sure.
there's years that I was locked up, years and years that I was locked up.
In varying stages.
Yeah, in varying stages, between California as a kid to Colorado to Texas, and then ultimately I into the federal system. And I come out of Forest City, out of the medium, down in Forest City, Arkansas is where I left on May 14th, 2008. Wow. And came to St. Louis. So, and then I had, they don't have parole, but they have probation and federal probation. I had 36 months of probation when I come to St. Louis. And I was on parole out of Texas because I had got picked up in Texas Department of Corrections, got a prison sentence there. While I was in prison in Texas, the feds came and showed up with an indictment. So I never left custody. So I went straight from Texas Department of Corrections over into the federal system and then caught all my time in the feds. And then they ran it at the same time, what I had left in Texas and then what my new time. So, yeah.
Yikes. Wow.
But back to coffee culture.
Well, that was literally, I've sort of been, I wanted to get through, the majority of that whole story.
Yeah, no, thanks. Yeah.
But my next immediate question is, what made you want to start a coffee company?
Well,
/shop.
So Sauna Lake was about 3 years of my life.
And that's the sober.
That's the treatment
treatment
facility.
center.
Yeah, out in Dittmer, and we have Maryland Heights and out in Kansas City. Excuse me. So, it went from 50 employees to 300 employees.
Wow.
And I told you how poor I was growing up, super poor. And, here I am on the front page of the New York Times. Here I am with 300 employees. I'm signing, 6-figure checks. I'm receiving 6-figure checks. And without going into, specifics, a business partner and I started not getting along. The girl, my wife, that I thought was mine, we started having issues. And my solution was to do what I used to do. And so when I returned to use for about, I started out with Adderall and just kept using stimulants. I never went, I knew if I drank that I'd end up back in prison because that's where I always go because I make such dumb decisions, right? And I didn't want to start using opioids because I knew I had enough money to kill myself in a day. And so I started with Adderall and kind of went on, found some meth, and while I'm COO of this company, of a treatment center, of a treatment center. And I just told this story last night at an AA meeting. And so, I eventually I went to Betty Ford Center. The walls were closing in, so to speak. I had the big house over in Des Peres. I had the 2 lowriders in the garage and the brand new Tahoe out front. I had the wife. I had all that stuff. And that's addiction, man. Yeah. That's addiction. Mm-hmm. And, I didn't want to use, but I also didn't want to feel the pain I was feeling from these different areas of my life. And I don't want to blame those things. They're certainly the stressors, but I use because I'm an addict, because I'm an alcoholic, and when the stress gets too much, that's what we do if we don't find another outlet, And so I ended up going to Betty Ford out in California and came back. Excuse me. That relationship ended up ending.
With your business partner?
With all of them. All of them. With Chad, with all of them. And, again, I'm not going to put all the business out there. I'm certainly not going to blame anybody else because I accept full responsibility, even for placing myself in the position to be harmed.
Sure.
I have to accept the responsibility for that, you know. Something I'm learning from my sponsor right now to do more of, you know, is what did I do to put myself in that position? So I came back, all those relationships ended. And you know, I was hanging out with a friend of mine. She owns Steel and Ink Tattoo Studios. They're in South County, down by the mall. And I was hanging out with her and her and her husband are friends of mine at a tattoo convention downtown. And she says, hey, I'm thinking about selling my coffee truck. You know, she had started this coffee truck business kind of as a thing for her and her family to do that wasn't tattooing, you know. And so I'm like, I don't need another business. You know, I got 3 right now that I'm, you know, just trying to hang on to. And so I was out in California. My son Aaron had moved back out to California a couple of times, but he moved back out there. I was out visiting him. We went to this cookie company out there called the Cookie Plug. And they had these big cookies, and it was a cool vibe.
Yeah.
And I was like, Aaron, we could do something like this in St. Louis, and we'll call it the Cookie Hustle, you know?
Yeah.
and,
Nice.
And he's like, Dad, are you even a baker? And I'm like, no, but we'll find a good
figure it
baker,
out.
you know? Yeah, we'll
Can't be
figure it
that
out,
hard.
you know? And so I came back to St. Louis, and I was working on that kind of project, and I was going out to New York to visit a friend of mine, and came back, and, you know, Brandy hit me up about the coffee truck. It was Coffee Culture, the truck. And I was like, all right, it's, you know, well, a light bulb went off. I thought, oh, I could hire people out of my sober house to work on the truck. And what a great, clean environment for them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? A great entry-level job for them. And so I bought the coffee truck business, the Coffee Culture business, while I worked on this Cookie Hustle thing. And I called Nicole over here. She was out in New Jersey. And actually, I called her to get a hold of a mutual friend's phone number that had ran a Starbucks, to get a hold of her and see if she'd come teach me coffee, you know? And so I ran it by Nicole, and Nicole's like, yeah, we'll both come out there and hang out. Cause I was like, come out here, I'll pay for everything. We'll pal around. We'll, you know, have a great summer together and everything. And both the girls came out here, and we worked on the coffee. The 3 of us worked on the coffee truck all summer, and Jen ended up going back out to California, and Nicole ended up staying and kind of developing out this Cookie Hustle cookie company that, you know, just phenomenal. You've had
The cookies are
they're
It's
insane.
the first thing he said when he was telling me. you were
they're
coming in.
ridiculous.
They're insane, bro. Like
They're like
I'm gonna
hockey
come
pucks.
out.
They're like hockey
Yeah.
pucks, but they're like bigger.
yeah,
I'm gonna come out. for
They're
sure.
quarter-pound cookies.
Yeah,
and-
quarter-pound cookies. That's a great way.
They are, and you know, we come up with some really cool stuff. You know?
Yeah,
Nicole
you
does.
You
Nicole
guys do
does.
like cool seasonal stuff too. and
Yeah. She does this Yammoth cookie. It's a sweet potato cookie / pecan pie, but it's better than both of those things. That people drive from like Wentzville whenever I post them to come get these things. It's just, yeah, really insane. She does really good, and so yeah, we worked the coffee truck all summer, and I said, you know, if I can get this thing like doing this number, you know, and then I'll know, okay, I can support a store, you know, maybe we'll look at a store. Well, we did it like 3 months out.
Oh, nice.
And just had a blast, you know. I had a lot of, obviously in the work I was doing and over at Clayton Behavioral, I had a lot of contacts in the company that either owned companies or were just, you know, politicians, whatever, like, and we just worked, we had a blast on the coffee truck that summer though, you know, really learning our way, you know, Jen teaching us. And
Where would you do you have like specific places that you would go on certain days, or how did you do
no,
it?
we weren't like a roaming truck like that. We still aren't. We're all privately booked.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah,
Oh,
we're all
cool.
privately booked. So we do a ton of schools for teacher appreciations. We do a ton of private companies for employee appreciations. We've done everything from the Cardinals front office, the Blues front office. We did the production crew when they're opening up, what was that place where they got the food hall over by IKEA?
The Foundry.
The Foundry. We were there before it opened. We did the news station, just like name a company, Enterprise, all of them.
You guys basically just park outside of it and then people come.
Yeah, and serve their employees or
So
whatever.
cool.
And we did a bunch of different festivals. We did the Balloon Festival.
Cool.
Peevely Days was pretty rad. We've done all kinds of different events. Fright Night at Six Flags. I actually got to drive our truck in and park next to the Batman ride.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, for like 3 weeks.
I worked one summer at Six Flags.
Really?
And I worked. Oh, they tried to emulate Disney and everything.
Yeah.
And at the end of the night, they do the big light show or whatever.
Yeah.
And I did retails because it was the only thing that I could get air conditioning during the summer on.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't want to sit out in the sun. Of course, like they still make you go out in like the tents and sell waters and stuff. But my spot in terms of where I always like actually made money was right out in front of Batman right there. And I would sell,
the best
glow sticks to
ride.
kids, whatever. Yeah.
We had a blast though. Yeah, they treated us good out there. And so we did all that all summer, and then I did a little geographical scan down Lindbergh, South Lindbergh, and there weren't any coffee shops.
There's really not.
There was Starbucks by the mall, Starbucks by the hospital, Mercy South. Excuse me, I've got a frog in my throat. And then over off of Gravois, there was nothing there.
Right.
So we found that little spot on the back side. I liked the back side. I could have had the front, but I liked it for coffee shop people whip in and out.
Yeah.
And we just spent they took too long building the place, but like 9 months designing it and building it, and finally opened it up, and we've just been working our butts off.
And what year did you guys open?
2022, August of 2022.
Cool. Sweet.
So I bought the truck in July of 2021. We were supposed to open in January
of 22.
Yeah, but there was a lot of delays and still getting
Welcome to
stuff.
construction.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and there was a lot still. That was kind of at the end of COVID, so there was still a lot of things hard to get. New air conditioning and whatever. And but yeah, and we've just been, Nicole really developed out the cookie hustle part of it. I've done the customer service. Like I said, I really designed the inside of the shop to be just a chill vibe. Everybody's welcome. It's just as much an experience coming in, whether I'm there or not. The people you said, the people that I hire, they're they interact, and I tell them that. Here's what I tell my staff when I hire them or interviewees. There's two things I require. One is that you have good work ethic, and here's what that means to me. You show up on time, even a few minutes early. If you're on time, you're late. In my books, that's why I get here a few minutes early. I was in your parking lot 20 minutes early. Oh, yes. But you show up on time. You don't cancel your shift. If you need to, if you need a day off, you kind of trade with somebody else. We're all really good about that. All the girls are good about that. And you do your job. I don't want to micromanage. There's a list here for closing duties. Just check it off, and you're good, Yeah. That's number one. So I set that out at the beginning, and number two is have fun. Because if we're not all having fun around here, I'll shut this thing down and just go back to being a therapist, an addiction therapist over in Ladue. This is about having some fun and getting to interact with the community and kind of modeling for the community post-COVID, just being good people.
Right.
I've showed up at 5:30 in the morning and had dads out there because I'm real vocal about my story and what I advocate for. There's a Narcan thing on my window, a little thing that says if you need it, it's inside. But I've showed up at the shop at 5:30 and had a parent there waiting to grab some Narcan from me, be trained in the use of Narcan because they found out that their child was using opioids. But that's going back to my other work, right? And just being non-judgmental, open space, come in, let me help you out, So I have as many stories as I have about Mo Network and that kind of work, just as many in the shop of people opening up. Yeah. Coming in. And that's why I wanted to do this, was because I got the vibe that you guys came on here, and whether it was talking about entrepreneurship or dads or guys or whatever. It's about finally being vulnerable, because this is the stuff we don't get to talk about in the general. You're not talking about the stuff in the gym, right?
No.
You know what I mean?
Right.
You're not having tattoo guys with all these felonies coming in here and shedding tears, you know, on the way to Schnucks or whatever, you know? No. So that's why I wanted to come here and hang out with you guys, because I like the vibe. So,
and well, your story is, I mean, your work is incredible. I mean, it's so inspiring, and I can't thank you enough for everything that you've done for, I mean, just our community. It's amazing, man. And I didn't know the extent of what you did until you know, now I've really got your story, and it's really incredible, Robert.
thank you.
I can't say enough good things. Well, now what's now you said you opened up a second location, a coffee culture. I didn't even know that.
Yeah. So we, a customer from South County was working out there at the Embassy Suites in St. Charles, that's attached to the St. Charles Convention Center there. And just kind of mentioned my story to their VP of sales or something. And she contacted me and said, hey, do you want to meet with the GM? And I went out there and we sat down, and they kind of heard, because I wanted to be upfront. Now, listen, this is what you're getting. You know what I mean? Like, and if it's too controversial for your brand, I get it. Like, you know what I mean? But I also want to be me. You know, and that's not going to change. And so they loved everything about it. And so we are inside the Embassy Suites attached to the convention center. If you're ever at the convention center, come on over.
Oh, I live out there, so that's the first spot I'm going to go before I come back and get some of those cookies.
If you're on your way to work, you can pull up to the hotel. Allows all of our customers pull up to the valet, run in, grab their coffee. We now have mobile ordering, coffeeculturestl.com at both locations.
You do cookies at both locations?
We have cookies at both locations. And we have other goodies out there too. So we, so we opened that up in mid-September. We're just now going into convention season. We kicked it off with a bunch of dance moms, dance competition. So that was nice. They all wanted their lattes. And then last weekend was the tattoo convention.
Oh, right up your alley.
With Sean and Brandy from Steel and Ink out there.
Cool. Oh, that's cool.
So it was kind of full circle. Yeah. But, and, I moved out of Des Peres. I don't know how they felt about the tattoo guy with the 1965 Cadillac DeVille lowrider coming through their neighborhood. They never said nothing to me, but
probably scared too.
I'm down in South County now, and I love the community there. I love the people out in St. Charles. They were so easy to work with opening that shop.
That's awesome.
Really easy, yeah. No offense, St. Louis County, but St. Charles County was really good people, and again, my kind of people. But yeah, I'm just a grandpa and a dad, and I hustle cookies, and I sling some lattes, and I sponsor guys in the program, and I try to mentor some folks. And in fact, a guy at the meeting I spoke at last night, came up, gave me his card. I have his card at the house. He said, hey, I heard you talking about business. I've got this idea, and I was like, man, do I love doing that stuff? You know what I mean? Yeah. I said, I did 4 startup companies in 5 years time. I've kind of got my
crash
whistle
course.
wet.
Wow.
Yeah. So
now, do you have any goals with coffee culture? Do you want to open any more locations, or anything that's like, in the future that you're aspiring to do?
For business wise, well, one of the things that I did St. Charles was it put me, I told you my son and my grandson are out in Warrenton. Yeah. So it put me a little bit closer to them. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, my grandkids aren't really into sweets. And I'm like Grandpa Willy Wonka. I got pounds and pounds of chocolate chips and M&Ms and all this stuff. But, I would love it if the people that I get to work with, i.e. the baristas that are in college and stuff, I would love it if they wanted to open their own coffee shop and I could help them.
That's awesome.
You know, like that's like legit. That would be the cool part for me. I think, you know, we want to be able to take Nicole and I want to be able to take some time off at some point, 7 days a week.
Yeah.
For 3.5 years now. But, you know, that's what it takes.
Right.
You know, to get a company off the ground. We're seeing it with our community, you know. We're almost to that point. We actually come out from under the debt this year.
Oh, awesome.
Congratulations.
Yeah, it's big deal. So yeah, you know, as far as the business, no, I think just continue to kind of serve up some good stuff, have fun, make connections. You know, we've seen people get married, divorced, have babies. You know, like we've seen it all because we really do get to greet them in the morning, and that's goes back to my counselor days, you know, of just getting to interact with people. Obviously, I talk a lot. You guys have let me talk this whole 45 freaking minutes.
Oh, that's why you're on.
That's why you're on. Yeah. If we're talking too much, we're not doing a good job.
Yeah.
You know, our job is to pull the story out of you.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and that's not a hard thing to do with you. So it's been great. Now, you launched 4 companies in 5 years. Do you think that people who go through extreme adversity like you have an advantage in entrepreneurship?
It's a great question. I think that, I think I'm a survivor. I think coming from where I did, well, first of all, my mom was, you know, she started out as a secretary in a real estate office, and fast forward 15 years, she was co-owner with the same guy that she had started with.
That's awesome.
You know, and so I think that part of it's in me. I talked about it last night that one thing I'm watching, though, is I can distract myself with a lot of work. I can distract myself with a lot of meetings, let's say AA meetings or whatever. I can distract myself with hobbies, you know, lowriders, Harleys. You know, I can distract myself, but where I'm at 55, almost 56 years old, because that's how old I am now, is really trying to develop my relationship with the higher power and letting that transfer into my relationship with whether it's Nicole or my kids or my grandkids or my friends, you know, people I care about. So, and not using the other things as a distraction. I don't know if I answered your question, but that's kind of the journey I'm on, where I'm at right now, evolving, you know. I think business, it's fun to me. I love building something.
Sure.
Right.
I think proving people wrong, you know, even at Clayton Behavioral, you know, which is like the top of the line kind of counseling place in St. Louis, in my opinion, and a lot of others. There weren't any doctors in there that had neck tattoos.
You're the only one. Huh?
You know, and I was right off the doctor's office. My office was right off the psychiatrist's office.
Yeah. Was there any like apprehension to you getting the job there? Were they like,
no,
you know, this guy doesn't?
They didn't judge. No, Dr. Jufra and Ned, kind of my mentors, my clinical mentors, and Matt Silva, not one bit, didn't blink an eye. In fact, you know, I would sit in those meetings and it would literally be like a table full of psychiatrists and PhD, you know, doctor, you know, psychotherapists and all these people. And I would be so intimidated. My less than would come out, you know, and like we'd all be discussing cases and I wouldn't peep up because I was like, I'm not jumping in this one, right. You know what I mean? And I'll never forget Dr. Jufra or Ned, both of them, I think it was, pulling me out and they're like, listen, we have you here for a reason.
That's awesome.
You bring something to the table, which was my lived experience. Like none of them had shot dope.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
None of them had been to prison. None of them had dealt with the things. And they were like, you bring something that nobody else at the table has.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, and that kind of got me on where I started embracing it more. Like I don't really refer to myself as an ex-convict anymore. I'm Robert Riley, right? I'm a grandpa first. Right?
Sure.
Like,
Right.
and but it was a journey, you know. It was a growing up part of that too. So at first, no, they brought me in, and it was probably more me that was like, do I belong here?
Imposter syndrome.
Yeah, imposter syndrome, you know. And finally, then I was running those meetings and I was like, what are you doing? You know,
The scary guy in the corner speaking up.
Yeah.
But I mean, you seem like you're this conduit from, the immediate needs of people to, in that case, somebody who either runs the facility or in all your business situations, you were the one running all those too. So it's like, your story seems like you're just this facilitator for people and business has been the byproduct of it.
Yeah. It's probably a great explanation, I think I connect with people because when I was 12 years old and we didn't have money for new school clothes, I had to wear my mom's Jordache jeans. I can go back to that. Or I never had a new skateboard. You know what I mean? I got whatever I could hustle up. And so I don't know, that's probably a bad way for me to explain that I just don't judge people.
Sure.
And cool, you got the brand new Ferrari out there, but what's really going on?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, that's cool. I'll go look at it with you. Probably ask you to drive it, but but what I really want to know is like, why are you in my office right now?
Right. Yeah.
And how can I help?
Sure.
Without doing any harm. Do no harm. Wow. Take no shit.
Damn right.
know?
Damn right. Well, Robert, your story is incredible.
Thanks,
we really
brother.
appreciate your time, and thank you so much for coming in here today. This has been awesome to get to know you better, and I mean, now I can't wait to go back to the shop and see you and know more about your story now.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure this will hopefully not be the last time we have you on, because it seems like you've got so many stories to tell and so much so much wisdom to share. So, but we do end the show the same way every time. So we got one last question for you. Sorry,
surprise.
This is normally Pat's job, but Pat's not here.
I can run it now.
Yeah,
I got
it.
Yeah. So it's called the Tombstone Game, and it's "Here lies Robert Riley. What's it say on your tombstone?"
Ooh. Here lies Robert Riley. Grateful father, grandfather, and friend.
It's beautiful.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Well, thank you again so much. And thanks to everybody at home that watched or listened to this episode. If you could hit that subscribe button for us, that would help us out a ton. Share this episode with a friend, because I know there was a lot of valuable information out there, and there's certainly someone out there who needs to hear it. Comment what you thought below, and we will see you next time.